Hello and welcome to another Coffee with Developers, this time from the office. I don't know why I'm dressed like this. It just felt like the right thing to do today. I've got two people here that know a lot about LLMs and about retrieval augmented generation and all the stuff that AI things are doing it. Both are working for Google Cloud. And the first person that we have here is Mete Atamel. How are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. It's just a matter of being in the office. I never record these things at home. I got my things set up for me. I got my coffee and everything. And here I got this microphone that probably records every movement of mine. So I'm not quite sure, but we'll see how it works out. And there's always editing and recording. The other person we have here is Guillaume Laforge, also from Google Cloud. First of all, how is Jordi doing?
Jordi, yeah, I'm not part of Star Trek, but AI and LLM stuff is the future, right? So, well,
I guess it works together, right?
Right.
So both of you have done a lot of this. You've given talks at there's great talks at DevOps Belgium. You just came back from JFocus, where you said, I don't know, somehow I got that impression that you were at JFocus lately, and you both work for Google Cloud, and you're both AI experts. And you weren't only just Google; you also worked for other companies before. You've been in the AI and machine learning space for quite a while. So how do you currently feel about it? Do you think it's great that there's so much attention about it? Or if for somebody who's worked for it for that long, is it just annoying that people are hyping it up all the time?
Well, for me, it's very, very exciting in the sense that there's always something new every week, if not days sometimes, like a new model, a new paper that explores some aspect of AI or LLMs, etc. So it's super interesting to be in that field and try new stuff. And there's always something to try out. So if you're curious, there's always something you can explore. So that's I love that.
Do you feel like there's so much to know and people try to take shortcuts all the time right now, or how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Guillaume that there's always new things coming up, and it's I always feel like I'm falling behind. So as soon as I feel like I learned something, there's something else. So there's this anxiety of like, okay, do I know enough in this field? Am I falling behind? So that's one. The other thing is that, I mean, I'm very excited in some aspects. Like, for example, writing code like changed dramatically for me now with like AI. Now, like, I almost don't want to write without AI, even though I know it's not perfect, but at least like it helps me a lot along the way. And then if it doesn't work, I can fix it. So it really speeded up my development, especially front-end development, because I'm mostly back-end developer. So if I need to put some kind of quick UI, now I don't need to really worry about like which library to use, how to do the basic things. Like the AI just gives me the basics. So that's very exciting to me. Like it feels like coding is fun again in a way. But on the flip side, like how much is going to happen? Like at some point, if there's no code generation at all and the AI just does everything, then at that point, like we need to think about what our role will be. So there's a little bit of unknown basically in that. Like we'll see what happens and how our roles will change. So it's kind of like a mixed feeling overall, I would say.
Well, it's interesting for somebody who worked on browsers and works on CSS specs and these kind of things. The front end was always my big thing, and people is like, create a Vite app, create a Next app, create Dasher-V, and you're like, why is all this boilerplate code in there? But yeah, it's basically it's convenience for developers, and basically, if you don't know what you're doing, then you might as well have something that other people have built for you that actually is going to be reliable to that degree. I'm curious, what editor are you using? Are you using IDX from Google, or are you a VS Code person like most of us? Mete?
Yeah, I'm mostly VS Code nowadays because I program in different languages. Like, so my background is like in strongly typed languages like C# and Java. But then recently, because of Gen AI, I switched to Python. So I think VS Code is kind of the base level IDE that kind of works. I mean, I know it's not as good as like IntelliJ, let's say for Java, but this is good enough. And then I use Google's Gemini Code Assist to help me with code generation and code completion. And Code Assist works both with VS Code and IntelliJ, JetBrains IDEs basically. So that's what I use. But then I also tried different things. I did try IDX, and I like the idea of having your whole development environment in the browser. It really speeds up setup. But then I did try things like cursor just in my hobby projects, and I really like it as well. And I know there's like 10 others out there that's on my list to try. So yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting that it's built into GitHub. That basically, when you're on any GitHub repository, you can press the full stop key, and it actually opens Visual Studio Code as the browser-based version. Well, the other one is a browser-based version as well because it's Electron, but it actually has it in there. And I love that when I just want to do a big quick pull request for somebody, instead of just downloading the whole thing and building it on my machine, I just can edit it in the browser directly. And it's amazing how far we've come with that. So that's pretty incredible. Guillaume, the big breakthrough that led to the whole LLM thing was, to me, the Transformers paper, which kind of came out of Google. And then it kind of like ChatGPT took over, and everybody's like, "Oh, it's an app, it's a chat thing," and nobody looked at the piping or the way it actually works under the hood. Now, Google is, of course, good leaps and bounds as well in this kind of thing with the Gemini release and also with the stuff in the Chrome. Do you think this is actually a good position to be in? That the first movers, like with ChatGPT being in the limelight and everybody wanting it to be everything, you can concentrate again a bit on the functionality behind it rather than the feature sets?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think there are things that are very visible. Of course, ChatGPT was very visible, but there are other things that Google pioneered and came up first. For example, when we introduced structured outputs, there was JSON mode for OpenAI models, but you couldn't define like a strong JSON schema for the outputs. And structured outputs came first with Gemini, for example, or other things like, let's say, well, there's been a bit of buzz around, for example, Notebook LM, which is one of our products and experiments where you have those AI hosts that discuss about the documents you gave it and create a podcast, etc. So there are some cool innovations coming up as well, and not necessarily as visible as this, first mover advantage of something like ChatGPT. But I kind of like this challenger place in a sense that you get to, okay, we need to do better. So for example, you've seen that we progressively climb all the leaderboards and benchmarks to be always at the top, if not the first model everywhere in every benchmarks. So it's interesting to see this competition between the actual players in the field.
It's interesting to see when you see the titles of some of your posts, what you've written, like Guillaume, like advanced RAG techniques. That's something I expect, but things you never dared to ask about LLMs. What was that about? What was the thing you never dared to ask about LLMs?
Yeah, the thing is, so there's all the buzz, around LLMs, but there are things like, along the way, as I was learning, so I did some AI before LLMs, etc. But when LLMs came up, ChatGPT, Gemini, etc., there are some topics that are kind of glossed over, or we don't really talk much about those topics. So for example, okay, we're using tokens, but why are we using tokens? Why not words or letters? Or why LLMs are not good at math without any help? Or so there were several questions I asked myself, I wondered about, and I was like, well, I'm not reading much about this in articles or seeing anything at conferences about those aspects. I was like, I need to dig deeper to better understand. So it's not so much about understanding the math, like how the matrix calculations actually work, but really figuring out the little things that make LLMs work and the way I can better understand why they work in some aspects or scenarios and not in others, basically, to take the best out of the LLMs. So I was very curious to, learn and write about those things and share about those things that I found along the way in my learning journey.
And I think that's general good advice. I started my blog in 2006 as a scratch pad. I just learned something and I wrote it down. And basically I didn't know something, so I forced myself to learn it and wrote down the learnings in my blog and basically learn in public. And that became a big success. Back then I made money with it. Forget about that one. Everybody has an ad blocker now. But it was really interesting to see how that actually worked out. Now, Mete, you have a great talk about pitfalls of LLMs. So Pre and post processing is required with LLMs. Why?
Yeah, so the great thing about LLMs is that, to get an output from LLM, you just make a single API call. It can't be any easier, right? But then people think that, okay, it's so easy. But usually, like, that's for hello world kind of applications. But usually, if you need to do something more complicated, you need to pre-process your data, and then you need to make the call, and then once you get it back, you need to actually post-process it. So it's never just a single API call. For example, if you need to ground your LLM, you need to probably set something like a RAG that Guillaume will talk about probably. So a RAG pipeline. So that means that you need to take your documents, you need to chunk them, you need to put them in a vector store. So there's a lot of things that needs to happen beforehand. And then once you have that, then you make the call, then you get the result back. And then again, the result you get can be, by default, it can be any format. So if you want a certain format, you need to make sure that there's a structured output. And then if it's JSON, then you need to get the JSON. And up until recently, it wasn't great JSON. So sometimes you would get JSON, sometimes it wouldn't be quite JSON. So you need to put some handling around that. Nowadays, it's better. So most latest models, they actually give you JSON. So stuff like that, right? So it's never just a single API call. So that's why I tell people you need to either think about these things and implement them yourself, or you need to rely on a framework like LangChain, or LangChain is the most popular one, but then there's Llama Index, there's a semantic kernel from Microsoft, stuff like that, so that you can kind of offload some of the stuff to the frameworks.
It's interesting. When I worked at Microsoft, I worked at Yahoo when JSON came out, and Douglas Crockford worked with me, and I worked with Enterprise before that as well, and it had like XML and XML schemas and SOAP and all the horrible things we don't want to know about any longer. And the first thing I'm like, so yeah, where's the schema and how can I validate the JSON? And he's like, I don't want that. It's not going to happen. It's just basically, it's a very easy data format. But now it seems that we actually, we need that in that environment as well. So Guillaume, like when it comes to this pre and post processing, it seems like the LLM is never enough. It has to be an AI stack around it that helps you to actually request the right format, validate that it is actually in a format that's good for you, and then convert it to something else. So what do you think is the most important part of that, the pre or the post?
Oh, pre or post? Well, I think somehow the post situation has improved, especially with the structured outputs, because now models, or most models, are able to really follow and mandatorily follow the actual JSON schema that's been requested. So maybe it's the what you put in that needs to be maybe pre-processed or double-checked, or asking clarifying questions. Or I remember doing an app that was taking. So I was a multimodal kind of application where you would give a picture, and the app would generate hashtags for your Instagram posts. And the thing was that when you gave or you let the LLM free to come up with an explanation why it comes with this or this hashtag, the hashtags that were generated were more creative. Whereas when I was using structured outputs, I would get less creative hashtags. And so I did things in two steps. First, be free to generate prose and suggest hashtags. And then a second step where I extract hashtags from the first request. And the output was much better because I had more creative tags, yet they were very structured because I just had a list of hashtags in the end. So sometimes you have to, experiment a little bit to figure out what works best in output and outputs. And sometimes even the way you define the schema in outputs also helps the LLM better frame its answer. So both are important, but the input is important as well.
Like, I should also add, like, I find it a little bit funny how the things that's been around for a while, they come up as new. Like, for example, now in Python, you can define like Pydantic classes. Like, so they're basically just classes that you define, and then you pass that to the LLM, and then when you get the response back, you get basically these strongly typed classes, and it's being like presented as like this new thing. But I'm like, in Java world, we had like Hibernate with databases where it did all this like strongly typed stuff, automatically. So it's basically the same thing, but in a different context, and yeah.
It's a bit like when we went from
like,
JavaScript to TypeScript, because we needed types on top of the thing to scale to like thousands of lines of code and actually help with IntelliSense and like the IDEs giving you the different things. Now, when you said like creating hashtags, and another big thing that I always is a bit of my bugbear is when people do alternative text for images and say like it's good enough if the machine writes something there, but as a non-sighted user, I might get absolute nonsense. A great example that's just doing the rounds is like that people asking all these different chat systems to create a picture of an empty room with at least no elephant in there, and all of them actually put an elephant in there and then claim that they haven't put an elephant in there. So that's the new strawberry problem that we had with other things before. Now, Mete, in your talk, the other thing is that the next bit is the problem with LLMs is that they hallucinate. I mean, I always thought like hallucinate sounded like a bad excuse, like we don't know why it does it, so we just tell it this hallucinates. But what are LLM hallucinations and what can we work around them?
Well, basically, like LLM tells you stuff that's not true, but it does it in such a convincing kind of way. And that's the problem with hallucinations is like, for example, just the other day I did a demo and I asked LLM, can you generate the first 50 prime numbers? And then it just went on and explained like how it's going to generate and what math formula it's going to use. So it looked really convincing, but in the end, the result was wrong, especially with math, like they're not that great. But in Gemini 2.0, you can actually enable code execution. It's a tool where the LLM actually generates Python code and then it runs it. So with that, if you need to do a calculation like prime numbers, for example, then you get basically more accurate results. So that's one thing you can do to make things better. But the other thing you can do is basically you need to ground the data, ground the responses with some data. You can either ground it with things like Google search, for example, or you can ground it with your own data. So if you use a RAG kind of pipeline, you can ingest your data, and then when the user asks a question, you find the relevant documents, and then you feed that to the LLM. So the LLM uses that kind of like it's like a subset of data that it uses when it answers. So we are basically constricting the LLM to a small data set. That way it can give us more accurate and more directed answers. So that's what you can do with hallucinations, grounding your responses basically. That means you need to use something like on Google Cloud there's a Vertex AI search where you can ingest your own website data, or you can ingest your own PDFs, things like that, and then you pass that as a tool to the LLM, and then LLM will use that instead of Google search, for example. So that's how you would ground with your own private data. And there's so many different ways of grounding. Again, like there's Llama Index, for example. You can use Llama Index to ground. There's LangChain has different ways of grounding. So like I don't think there's one way, and there's no one standard yet. So it depends where you're running, which cloud, and what kind of technologies you're using. And then with that, you will use one grounding technology, basically, depending on what kind of grounding you want to do.
Now, Guillaume, the other problem that LLMs have is that they're costly to train and they're costly to weigh. So they're actually outdated public data. So I remember the first ChatGPT version were from 2011. So when you asked it about new CSS features from last month, it had no idea how to do that. How can we work around that issue that you work with stale data in an LLM?
Yeah, so typically, since we mentioned web searches and RAG, those two aspects are definitely the best way to solve that problem, in the sense that when you do a web search, it's going to search for live information, the latest information that's been indexed by search engines. But when you work on your own data, of course, especially when it's private information, customer data, etc., LLMs haven't been trained on that information, so they can only hallucinate. It's not possible that they give proper, answers out of that, or they could just say, I don't know, if prompted correctly. So when you use RAG, actually, the information that the LLM will generate ultimately is as up to date as the data you gave it in the first place through the RAG search results that you put in the prompt of the LLM. So if your data is up to date in your vector database, etc., then the responses will be up to date from the LLM. So that's really the two ways to get past outdated data and get live information.
So you can also provide LLM access to any API, basically. For example, let's say you want to learn about weather information from today. I mean, one easy way of doing that is to run with Google Search, and Google Search will get the weather information. But if you want to,
or look out of the window, or
or another one is that you have a web API, and then you basically provide that again as a tool to the LLM and say, look, there's this weather API available to you, and you can call it with these parameters, and this is kind of so you basically provide a function with some description of like what the function is supposed to do, and then you pass that to the LLM, and then LLM, when you ask about the weather, it figures out that, okay, now someone is asking me about weather, so can you call this function that you told me it exists? And then your application will call the function, get the result, feed it to the LLM. Then LLM will respond back saying, okay, the weather in London is rainy and 10 degrees or whatever, something like that. So that's another way of like feeding your LLM with like any kind of data really coming from any API that's accessible by the LLM.
And that becomes really immediate. I remember Gemini yesterday announcing that it can actually do live video reading of your mobile phone. So you can actually ask Gemini what's happening on your phone at the moment, which sounds to me kind of scary because I'm like, did it share the whole thing? Where did it go? So, but the immediacy is there. One thing you have in your slides here is that LLM inputs can get expensive. What do you mean by that, and how can you work around that?
The latest models, they have this long context. I don't remember the exact number because it always increases. It was like 1 million tokens or something, but now it's 2 million. And what that enables you to do is you can basically send like long text, like or like you can send your whole repo, for example, in one request, or you can send like a bunch of videos at once to the LLM and ask LLM, can you analyze this? And it will do that, which is great because you're giving a lot of context to the LLM. But at the same time, like these things, they cost money, right? Like because the bigger the context, the more tokens you're going to use. So if you're going to keep sending the same stuff over, let's say there's a video of a movie or something like that, and you want to ask a bunch of questions about it. If you keep sending the same video over and over, you're going to keep paying over and over, right? So that's why it can get expensive. But there are things that you can do to help, and these are basically good old software engineering principles. So what you can do is, for example, on Gemini, there's something called context caching. And the idea of context caching is basically you create a cache, and then you save things that you're going to reuse in your prompts, like videos or PDFs or your whole GitHub repo or whatever. So you save it there, and then you use a cache data when you ask questions. That way, you're not only sending it once, and then you can ask multiple questions to it, and it will be much cheaper that way. So that's one way of getting the expenses down. Another one is like if you keep sending prompts one after another, like let's say you need to do processing of like 100 things, and you can just do the naive thing and just send 100 requests one after another. That's going to be expensive because first of all, you're sending 100 requests like as if they're separate requests, and secondly, it will be expensive because you're going to do it sequentially. Again, you can use the good old software engineering principles, and you can do batch generation, what's called batch generation. This is, again, another API from Gemini, where you basically just say, okay, these are 100 images I want you to process, for example, and then you just do a batch call. So you send the whole call, 100 calls at once, and then Gemini will do all the calls and then populate the results somewhere. And then when it's done, you go and check the results, right? This, again, makes sense because you're parallelizing all the calls, but also it's cheaper. So instead of doing, like, I don't remember the exact number again, but compared to regular calls, it's much cheaper to do it a batch kind of call. So you need to think about these things. Like don't just do the default thing, the easy thing that just make a call and get the result back. But think about like how much it costs and what kind of features I have available, like batch generation or context caching, to make it a little bit cheaper for you.
It's the same with like Gen AI. When you think about it, like, okay, let's generate 5 pictures for me. Let's generate a video for me. And halfway through, you realize it's hallucinating. It's not giving me the thing that I want. And you want to press Control C, but you can't because it's actually just plowing away doing the thing. And I think there's a bit, there's a concern about like not only doing using up your tokens, which can get expensive, but also just in terms of memory consumption and energy consumption that is unnecessary. So batch processing, cleaning up before you actually send things there. There's a lot of tools right now, for example, cropping up that allows you to upload videos and give you like a 5-hour video and give you like a 20-minute thing. Nice to have, but at the same time, oh my God, how much energy is being wasted that way. So it feels like we're in a world where we just think, oh, just throw it at the machine. But let's think about how much it actually costs with that one. There's a saying going around that data is much more important than the model. Is that really that much of a differentiator in a RAG or multimodal world? And also the other problem is like generated code or code that comes back from an LLM could contain PII or could contain inappropriate content. How can we work around? How can we make sure that an LLM doesn't give us things back that we should not know about? I know there's like thousands of hidden private GitHub repos were just indexed and thrown out by Microsoft's Copilot. So how can we work around these issues? So is data really more important than the model, and what can we do to clean up the data before it comes back?
Right. So first of all, I want to highlight this acronym GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. So obviously, if LLMs have been fed up with lots of garbage stuff, or not necessarily garbage, but stuff that is not relevant for the context, then maybe it can be seen on the output as well. I think that most foundation model providers have been spending a lot of time cleaning and improving the data sets on which they work on and train the models. So hopefully, I hope the input data, at least during the training, is cleaner, compared to maybe the first few iterations. There's that. Then when you implement also things like RAG, you have to pay attention to only give the results that matter and that are like multi-tenant versus single tenant kind of scenarios. And you should filter the data just for one customer. So you only put in the context of the LLM just the information for that customer. There's that. What else? And I would also mention things like, for example, you mentioned about PII information. You can also wrap the LLM calls with access to APIs that do PII redaction, for example. So, for example, on Google Cloud, there's a service. What is it called? It was called data loss prevention before, but there's a new name. I forget what it is, or new acronym. But you can say, okay, here's the input from the customer. I'll redact everything so that when you send stuff to the LLM, there's gonna be like a black box over the email address or something, or a social security number. And then in output, you can do the same thing. So it's also things like guardrails to avoid people trying to derail the conversation and encourage the LLM to give information that it's not supposed to give. So it's really about the integration of all this, and you have to pay attention and put good security principles in place, etc. So it's a lot of like the what is it called, CSRF protections that you put in place for your HTML forms, etc. That's the kind of things you have to pay attention to if you don't want to fall into those traps, basically. Yeah.
So another thing that a lot of people are throwing around right now is the rise of the agentic web. Mete, what is your take on that one? What is it actually, and why is it such a differentiator?
Yeah, I mean, what is it? I don't know. It's really like it's such an overloaded term that it feels like any LLM that does something ends up being called agentic, right? So I don't really have like a good answer, like what is agentic. But I guess in the future we'll see a web where we don't just search for information randomly, like in random websites, but instead we have these agents that kind of get the information for us, and then they also do act on it, like they do something for us. So it's more, so we just kick off a process basically, and then the agents kind of do the rest. I mean, that's how I see it. And what it means, I mean, as a user, I think I'm excited about it if it works. So that's like a big if. Like if it does the work and gives me the relevant information, and then goes ahead and, let's say, like if I'm looking for a hotel, it goes ahead and books the hotel for me and sends me an email. And if it all works, great. But we have to get there, right? So as a user, I'm excited. As a developer, it's going to be a whole different world, basically. Like, how do you write these agents? How is there going to be an agent marketplace somewhere where I just install these agents? And
we tried that with models, right? And that didn't work out. Like we said, like, oh, there's going to be a model marketplace and everybody can train their own models and sell it to people like Amazon and Google, and that didn't work out. So that the marketplace is always the first thing, like, oh, cool, we can monetize that. But like that, then it not growing is an interesting bit. The interesting thing about what I see about the agentic news, when people say, like, get more excited, the more actually they can access. So like, oh, it can access your camera, it can actually simulate your voice, it can do a voice call that a hotel wouldn't know that it's not a person, it can access your machine and actually install npm packages randomly. This is like a malware's wet dream, you know. Like, do you think we're giving these things too much power and we're doing it just for the sake of like more convenience? What do you think, Guillaume, is like do we need to find that middle ground?
I think that all these agents that are coming up, they have to keep security aspects in mind, and the way, so like installing packages and such, I wouldn't use such agents myself, for example. Now, I don't think providers will come up with such an approach. Rather, that they would give you a sandbox on which things could be installed, but they won't let agents actually mess up with your environment. It wouldn't be responsible from those agent providers. So again, security concerns should be top of mind, and it should be done in a way that enables rather than enable new scenarios for sure, but in a sandboxed kind of way. All right.
Another thing that bugged me is that everybody now is super excited about, like, there's headlines, oh, ChatGPT now has a native iOS app. And you're like, well, amazing. Like, we had PWAs and stuff like that for ages. I could turn anything into an app. And why would I want like 50 different chatbots on my machine? It feels like going back to when we had like ICQ, Skype, Messenger, Yahoo Messenger, and then we use things like Trillium or Adium to actually have one thing that has them all. So do you think in the future that maybe the operating system of mobile devices or even on desktop devices will be a place to host all these different engines that do things differently from us? Do you think the packaging to sell one product with a model inside is just too convenient?
I mean, companies, they like to have their own things, right? So I don't see, for example, like an OS from one company having the model or another company like in a native kind of way. Obviously, they're going to want their own models. So I think that will stay because we have companies. But at the same time, I also think that models are almost like implementation detail. I think they will be at some point where, just like I type into a website and then the website opens, but under the covers, there's all these networks, right, that make that happen. But as a user, I don't care, right? Like, I just type and I get the information. So I think similar to that, like the models will be like that in the background, like getting me stuff, telling me stuff. But what's that model? Who is it? Where it comes from? I think that as a user, I wouldn't care. I wouldn't care about that. I think that's the future that we're gonna have. And I also see models like being embedded like everywhere. Like, so it would be like the same model probably on your desktop, and then maybe you have your phone, same thing. Then maybe you turn on your TV. Like, so I see this like one model that knows everything about you across different mediums, and then you just work with the same thing. Like that's how I envision, like where like there's this thing I talk to, and it just knows everything about me, and then it helps me wherever I am. So that's where I think we'll be, but I don't know. I mean, we'll see.
But I think with generative AI, I think that the real success will be not with chatbots everywhere and all sorts of chatbots that we have to install, but making LLMs somewhat seamless and transparent, so that the overall user experience is improved, because everything is smart everywhere, pre-filled forms and all that kind of stuff. And the LLM becomes kind of invisible ultimately once it's integrated correctly into the various apps that we use on an everyday basis. Whether it's your word processor, whether it's I don't know, your coding assistant, etc. It has to be about the seamless integration and transparency, rather than being about X apps that you need to install to get your job done.
I was gonna say, like, it always boils down to like user experience in the end. I think.
Yeah.
I mean, it's gonna be like, once the models are pretty much like the same, like give or take, then I think who's gonna be successful is like who creates like the best experiences for the users, so that they don't have to be frustrated with the technology.
I think we have that in the photo space. I mean, like when I've got a Pixel phone since day one, and it's like at a certain time, the amount of lenses and the amount of like sensors in there were not that important anymore, because none of the pictures that you took is actually the picture that it recorded. It will be cleaned up automatically. It will be just denoised. There's all kind of stuff happening. So the model on the device that actually changes those images while you're taking them or right after you're taking them gives you a different experience. Much like, but I mean, of course, like people who are going for the purist approach would be saying that that's horrible, because it's like I never to take anything. But then again, I guess if you nowadays press the brake in your car, you're not actually connected to the brakes any longer. There's a few computers in between there as well. We've been in this world for quite some time. Like, what is one thing that you see people do wrong when implementing AI in their products that drives you nuts? Mete, what do you want people to stop doing?
Oh God, like I have a story on this. So last December I was in Asia and I had a flight, and then I had to change the flight. But the airline, I won't name which one, maybe I should name them, but anyway, they had a chatbot, and there was no way, like the chatbot was quite helpful. Like it would pull up my information and tell me when my flight is and all that. But for changing it, it was like unchangeable fare, but it wouldn't tell me that. And I just went in circles, like multiple days, like trying to get past this chatbot and talk to someone just to verify it. But I just couldn't find it, and it was so frustrating, because I think it's like one of those cases where technology is being used, and I think it does help up to a certain extent. But at some point, like, you need to get people involved. So there has to be a path to that. You can't just expect AI to do things, and maybe the airline saved a lot of cost because of this, but then they also frustrated a lot of people like me. So next time I book a flight, I'll think about this, because I know that I won't be able to change the flight, so make sure there's a path to people. I think that's what I would say.
It's a bit like these telephone systems when you were asked, I press 1, 2, 3 to go to that menu and that menu. The first ones, when you always pressed a number that didn't exist, that got you directly to a person, because the system was basically saying, okay, that person's too dumb to find the 3 on the telephone or something. But sadly enough, nowadays, it just kick you out. I mean, HP just announced that they put a 15-minute break in the telephone calls for people, because they just don't want to talk to them. In England, there's this, we're going to have those people on Coffee with Developers soon. They made this AI granny that basically spammers or fishers, when they actually start calling, they actually talk to a woman that doesn't exist and waste their time. So I think that's a very, very cool, like, kind of a physical honeypot for like spammers, and that was really interesting to see. So to end, Guillaume, what is one thing that you think everybody learning AI should get their head around? Like, where do you get started to actually be not only a victim, as you said, like that you're feeling you're falling behind and you're feeling left out, but what is one thing that is the best like return for your investment as a mental person, like to start thinking about AI?
That's a great question. I mean, there's lots of interesting resources on the web or on books that may be interesting for people to, read about, to better understand the technology that's involved, how it's working under the hood. So, especially, I mean, if you're curious, there's really lots of material on that. So I would just encourage people to follow maybe some AI influencers here and there, or to try to, or there's a newsletter that I'm subscribed to. What is it called? Like TLDR on generative AI or something like this. Like every day they share the latest news, and it's a good way to feel for what's going on. What are the latest developments? What are the latest trends? And then you don't have to go very deep through all the articles and papers that are published by researchers, but at least getting a sense of what things are happening, in the field is good to try to portray or to not forecast, but to imagine the places or maybe the new features where that your application could benefit from by using LLMs in a way or another. So it's hard to find good sources, but there are some interesting newsletters maybe that people can follow to get up to speed with what's going on.
It's pretty cool that something as old as feeds and newsletters are still the best place to find things. Because when you said AI influencers, I started flinching, because like a lot of people were VR experts, and then next morning they were AI influencers on LinkedIn. That seemed to be the new cool thing to do. And a lot of it is like marketing and connecting that from the other. Maybe we need an agent to work through these things for us. So, exactly. But then again, I mean, I'm just looking through all the the descriptions for our conference coming up in July. So we had like over 2,500 submissions, and I have to go through them. And the amount of like presentations that you see have been the call for paper have been done by ChatGPT, because nobody speaks like that. Don't do that. Don't hide behind and technology and sell it as you, because it's you on stage at the end, and I want to see you there. And I guess with that, I'm looking forward to see what next from you. And hopefully we'll see you soon at our event as well. Maybe there's a chance. And thanks very much for this. So that was fun. I hope you had fun too. So definitely. I hope to see you soon.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.